In a world asking the question, what if the movies that got delayed came out on time and they were different? That's the case in my universe. I'm Steven Shinder and you're listening to Delayed Replay, Season 5, airing every other Saturday, unless I change my mind. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay, that podcast where we recap and review movies that got delayed in that other universe but came out on time in our universe. I'm your host, Steven Shinder, and joining me once again, first time in quite a while, it's my good old friend Ted from Ted's Booze Cellar. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going all right. Sort of still trucking along, and a lot of changed in the time that I last was on the show here. I've moved a couple of times now, actually, and I've started an entirely new job that I've been doing for a few years. So, yeah, things have changed quite a bit. I actually, just late last year, actually celebrated the 5th anniversary of the first episode of Ted's Booze Cellar, so that's a good milestone to reach. But, yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, and yeah, congrats on Ted's Booze Cellar turning 5. This podcast is on its 5th season, so it technically turns a Delayed Replay turns 5 next year, and it really takes a lot of commitment, doesn't it? Like, I know there have been times where I've been like, should I keep doing this? And then I just kept doing it. So I'm like curious if you've ever had like those moments.
I definitely think I have to certain degrees, but I think what sort of kind of keeps me going is the fact that in recent like years, loads of my friends have really been getting into it, and so there is at least a somewhat intimate and sort of very close audience of people who watch me, then that gives me a bit of fuel to keep going. Plus, sometimes when I'm feeling a bit of burnout, it might just be because I just need a short-term break anyway, so sometimes it's good for me to just take like 1 or 2 weeks off just to take a break, really.
Yeah, it really takes feeling it out and knowing your limits. I mean, kind of like what you say at the end of each episode, know your limits, so it kind of applies to that as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like I feel like I continue it for as long as possible. But like I said, once in a while, like every few months, I might fancy a week or two as a break just to sort of get my sort of motivation back and just recharge, as it were. But yeah, no, I've been enjoying it recently as well.
Nice. Yeah, so the movie we're talking about on this one is Imaginary, the horror movie from Blumhouse. Or
Yeah.
or Bloomhouse, as it's pronounced in the Delayed Replay universe. Like, apparently there's a difference between the universes.
Wait, so hang on. In that case, is it that Heinz make mayo and... No, sorry. Is it that Hellmann's make ketchup and Heinz make mayo then in this universe?
I do get those brands mixed up, but yeah, that might be the case.
Yeah, I always noticed that in this burger bar. So,
Yeah. So first off, this is something I've asked another friend, but have you ever had an imaginary friend before, Ted? Like growing up?
Trying to think. I mean, I have recently thought, do I have any talking capybaras that are my imaginary friends, because I sometimes see those out the corner of my eye, but then I remember that's just me when I'm drunk, so I don't know if that really counts. But I did always imagine when I was a kid that there might have been some kind of imaginary friend in the cupboard that was in my bedroom, the wardrobe, I mean, anyway, that I kept my clothes in, and I always just felt like there was the spirit of one of my cuddly toys or something like that hiding in there, or something really weird like that. Obviously somewhat influenced by the darkness of Northern European folklore stories, but that's generally what I thought at the time when I was like about 7 or 8.
Oh, dang. Yeah, when I was little, I thought I heard a noise in my closet, and I thought maybe it was like either a monster or maybe just Santa Claus. But it was probably nothing. But
Yeah, I also used to have like stuffed animals as a kid. Like there's a rabbit, which I unimaginatively named Bugs Bunny, but it was female. But I also did like have like imaginary, like I would sort of copy and paste from cartoons that I liked. Like there were a few like imaginary characters from Sticking Around that for a little bit I sort of pretended were like my imaginary friends. But that's yeah. So I guess I've dabbled a bit in that when I was a kid, but not anymore. All my friends are real.
Dabbled in it, making it sound like it's like you get into making sourdough bread or something like.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say it sounds like you've like dabbled in drugs like psychedelics or something, which is not the case for me, but
Yeah, then would have sounded like the biggest like narc fed ever, and just been like, "Hello, sir. Do you know where I can find the illicit substances?"
yeah. Yeah, just breaking down the door, FBI open up, or I guess it would
Yeah,
be DEA open up, but yeah.
yeah, just complete lack of subtlety. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, some people like have in high school particularly I have asked me if I'm high after I said something like sort of outrageous and I'm like, no, it's just me because it genuinely was just me being silly.
you also have kind of quite a sort of like talky, kind of sort of floating kind of voice that sort of carries the enunciation of certain words certain ways. So I imagine like with your kind of like dry sense of humor as well, like it probably I probably imagine that happened a lot in school.
Yeah, yeah.
Your dry sense of humor doesn't apply to the disgusting food pics you keep sending us.
Yeah, I feel like I've dialed that back a bit.
Stop
But
sending me pictures of cornflake jello squares.
uh, but yeah, so in this movie, Imaginary, there's this family, and the stepmom, Jessica, is played by DeWanda Wise, and the younger daughter, her name is Alice. She's played by Piper Braun. And so they go to this house, and there's like a stuffed teddy bear, and whose name is Chauncey. And apparently, this used to be the stepmom's toy, and the little girl keeps saying, "Oh, Chauncey says that you can't play because you abandoned her." So, what do you think of the way they like the setup here, like at the beginning of this film?
It was rather interesting. There was horror wasn't really quite so prominent at the beginning, although there is this slight underlying sense of unease throughout the film, bit from the beginning as well. And the cinematography definitely helps with that. It's got quite a sort of very not bland, but sort of very sort of neutral kind of sort of feel to it. The cinematography, I would argue, at the beginning of the film. And it's only once you get to the scene with the find a painful thing, the slamming a hand down on the plank bit.
Yeah, with like the nail. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only really the first time I think we get like a very clear realization that there is some horror going on here, and all of a sudden you go from like this just plain slice of life story to like a horror murder mystery with detective elements, where you've got like her having that like sort of like I thought it was almost kind of like a teacher-student relationship between her and the older lady down the road who sort of taught her about the mythology behind these monsters, the sort of insert context, wise person here sort of thing.
You're right. Like it does feel like kind of plain slice of life for a bit. Like, the family's just hanging around and they're just like chugging some Dr. Peppers while watching
Yeah,
like SpongeBob on the TV.
yeah, and
Um,
you're just like, what is this? It feels like even more sort of milk toast than like some episode of Full House almost.
yeah. Yeah. Believe it or not, I only remember seeing bits of Full House. I don't think I ever like at least I don't remember ever watching a full episode. Like I never really got into it, but I did sort of get like what the vibe of the show is. It's kind of trying to be like sweet and like comfy and like moral of the story type thing. So yeah, I did kind of get that vibe in the beginning of this movie.
One show I definitely feel like that after only seeing a very, very small amount of it is The Big, the Bold, and the Beautiful, which might be one of the most gauche American soap operas I've ever seen. And some of the cinematography in that is absolute nightmare fuel. It's so bizarre. They love having characters say dramatic things and then it zoom on the faces of the other people in the room. It's bizarre, but no, I have a similar sort of relationship to that show as you do with what you just mentioned as well.
Yeah, I don't know how soap operas go on for so long, like on a daily basis and for decades. Like, I don't know how that happens.
Keep in mind, Emmerdale in the UK obviously started out as Emmerdale Farm back in the 1960s, and that's been going on since then. So that's been going on for like nearly 70 years now.
Oh, wow. Starting off the movie off plain, there's kind of a strength to that, because I feel like a trend in some other horror movies is that they'll begin with a flashback showing like the evil thing and then flash forward to the present and you're in the present story. But I feel like here it started off more subtly, which was refreshing, at least for that first portion of the movie. But I could also see how there were some people who like apparently brought their kids to see the movie and they're like, I thought this was just a kids movie, and it's like, bruh, did you not see the trailer to this?
I don't know. I think that does happen more than you'd think, though, because I do remember there being quite a few sort of rip-off movies on sort of big Pixar and Disney films in the mid-2000s, that there was a really big plague of them. So I don't know. I think that kind of stuff can work sometimes.
You mean like ripping them off, or
either ripping them off or people just not recognizing the differences in advertising and like recognizing the differences.
I see.
Certain products, I should say. I didn't really explain it too well, but like that's kind of what I was getting at.
Okay, yeah, because like on the spectrum, like you have mockbusters, like for example by the Asylum, which are most likely shot, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like some competition between like DreamWorks and Pixar, where there are certain films that have suspiciously similar premises, and I could kind of see how some people might get those mixed up. So yeah, it's a weird thing that happens. I mentioned the old lady who has this book that has like, it talks about these creatures from some other dimension or something that like tether themselves to objects that are like near children. And like, what'd you think of the designs for like the creatures, like the illustrations, and when we eventually see what they look like IRL?
Well, I mean, funny that we should mention capybaras, because I did think that the way that the monster manifested itself when the young teenage boy with like the slick back hair was going upstairs, I remember when it manifested in front of him, I don't know why, I swear to me it looks like a capybara for some reason. But I think when we do see them more fully, these creatures, they look almost kind of like some kind of shadow man almost. And yeah, they just almost look like what people used to describe, a sleep paralysis monster as before that famous sketch was done. So I think that's kind of the way I describe them in my personal interpretation of how they looked.
Yeah, initially I thought, oh, it looks kind of like a beaver, but with like little wings, or maybe those are the ears. But yeah, I can totally see that like they're very similar looking animals, and like the design, I can totally see that. When that jump scare with that guy with the slick back hair you mentioned, like when that happened, there were actually people in the row behind me who were like chuckling at the jump scare.
Yeah, I do think that the shape-wise design of the creatures doesn't really lean towards them being super threatening. They were, for me personally, the scariest part about the film, more than the monsters, was actually the implied horror. and that's what really, really kept getting to me. Just the sheer anxiety permeating the first like 2/3 of the movie.
For example, when we see the thing with the nail happen, like we don't see the nail go into the skin. It's like all you know is that like this child like is pressured into doing this dangerous thing, and like I think in general people are like it's more unsettling for them to see this happen with a child, like even if they don't see it like explicitly, like what's implied is still like very horrific. It's kind of like what people would say about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You know, some people would imagine that they saw the hook going in, but it turns out it like cuts away before that happens. So like it's really strange the way the imagination works when it comes to engaging with film.
Yeah, no, you can always interpret very different things from one another from the same scene. You know, I always get people, for example, interpreting that the ending of RoboCop is, you know, a heroic victory against the malignant evil of the film. But then again, also a lot of people kind of point to the fact that the end of that movie, you know, showcases that no, you know, Detroit is still in this terrible situation where it's still going to be gentrified and privatized, and RoboCop has only stopped the rot for the moment. So it's interesting when you get sort of different reactions to scenes and characters like that.
Yeah, because I can totally see how with that archetype, you know, on the surface, people might see RoboCop as like an action figure type character, and you know, maybe the music also makes them think that, oh, there's triumph here. But like if you really examine like the themes of the movie and what happens and think about the aftermath, like there's definitely a discussion to be had there. And yeah, people get different things out of it. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a funny old conundrum, really. But you know, I have noticed it, especially as I've gotten older as well. I definitely think.
Right. So as all of this is happening, you know, we get more imaginary friend creatures, you know, the I forget what they called these creatures. I think they called them imaginaries or something. And they notice that like some other kids in this town are like coming down with an illness, and that's a sign that like more of these creatures are sort of uniting and coming about. Well, what'd you think of the number of these creatures and how that was handled?
I actually thought it was handled quite well in a strange kind of way. The way that they handled the number of threats in the film kind of reminded me almost of Monster Squad, because that, while the implication of like the violence and the action on screen is very grand and, you know, crazy, at the end of the day, the overall scope of what's happening in universe in that film is actually on a pretty small scale. It's only happening in like a very small American town with like a handful of monsters that these kids are trying to battle. And I kind of felt like that's what it was like here, although obviously a lot more intensive and darker, in the sense that, you know, they're only fighting, you know, creatures that are within the realm of like where they're subsiding, but they are absolutely out to get them, and they are very, very much not to be underestimated.
Is Monster Squad the one that begins with like a portal, or am I thinking of a different movie?
I think I know right at the beginning. I think Count Dracula gets the mummy out of his coffin, either the mummy or Frankenstein's monster, one of the two. And that's the scene I remember from the beginning of that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to remember, like there was some 80s horror movie that I think involved kids and began with a portal, and it kind of reminded me of the end of Evil Dead 2 in a weird way. But yeah, I don't know. I'll have to double check that later. But um yeah, like they could have very well gone overboard with this, but I think at least at this point in the film, they're like handling the, you know, the number of creatures very well, and they sort of show each individual child and what their families are going through, like in this little sort of montage with the sinister music.
Mm.
What did you think of the music overall throughout the film?
What did I think of the music? I thought, yeah, it was quite good, actually. I think it had a very sort of, again, kind of with like the cinematography, it kind of had a very neutral feel for like the first half or two-thirds or so. And then it definitely moved into more of like a slow-paced, more horrific kind of tone in the last like half an hour, 45 minutes. And I'm trying to think of an adjective to kind of describe it. Can't really think of one clearly right now, but yeah, again, the music really mirrored the cinematography in terms of tone and feel, and I really liked how they made them fit together that way.
Yeah, the music was done by Bear McCreary. Um,
Mm.
and actually, just yesterday, me and a friend were having a conversation about him because I recently started watching the Percy Jackson series, and he does the music for that, and which kind of surprised me because I thought he was mainly a horror guy. I know he's done the really bad Child's Play remake, like the plot
Mm.
notwithstanding, the music itself had some interesting moments here and there. But yeah, apparently he's like been all over the place. Even did like the Battlestar Galactica remake from or reimagining from 20 years ago. So he's done a lot.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. When you sort of see someone in a production that you just would never think of seeing them in, it's like, what's the film? The Ant, I think it is, and I remember in that I was just completely confused as to why Christopher Walken voices one of the characters because it's just really not his kind of film at all. And then I looked up and I saw he was in a couple other films and never expected to see him like a really crappy vampire film and then like some weird sort of racing movie as well. I was like, what on earth is this guy gotten up to?
Yeah.
No, I feel like I know what you mean, just in different formats.
Yeah. Funny enough, last night I was like wondering like what if instead of Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown in Back to the Future, it had been Christopher Walken. Like that would have been like so
Or,
strange.
or just completely out of left field, like Christopher Reeves. Like he probably would have been actually quite good at it, but you would have just thought, why is Superman here?
Yeah, like he doesn't have that sort of professor look, so they probably would have had to like give him like fake hair and maybe some
Yeah,
makeup or something.
yeah, because he was very like burly and sort of like archetypally macho movie star, like how you would imagine male movie stars to be in like the 50s, 60s, and arguably 70s. So it was, yeah, no, it was quite. That would have been bizarre, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't until like much later, after like what he went through and he had to adopt to his new lifestyle. He was a professor type character in Smallville. They did the thing where the a previous Superman has a cameo as like a different character and was sort of a mentor character in a couple episodes, I think, which was interesting. Yeah, another thing that I was very conscious of during this movie is how effective like the stuffed bear type threat is compared to like I mentioned the Child's Play remake earlier, and I really think if it hadn't had the Child's Play elements in it, like if they had focused on something introduced in that film, which is a toy called Buddy Bear, like if it had been about like AI stuffed bear toys, like that genuinely could have worked. You just need like real good marketing, and the film Megan, I thought was sort of vindicated me in believing that that would have worked.
Wasn't this film produced by the same people who produced Megan? Actually,
Yeah, I think that was also by Bloomhouse. Yeah, so it's very nice to see when I guess I'm sort of drawn to the like evil, sinister doll or stuffed animal type thing. I've kind of incorporated that in one of my stories, but with different execution. But yeah, I don't know. There's just something about that trope that kind of draws me. So it's nice whenever it like actually works.
No, definitely. I think we all have a few tropes in films, whether it be horror or otherwise, that we do find comfort in. I try to think. Yeah, I think sort of haunted dolls aren't really one for me, but the reason why I was partially drawn to this one is because I like sort of talking and or haunted stuffed animals. That's why I really liked the two Ted movies. Obviously, not just because it shares the same name as me, but it's the similar sort of absurdist concept in play. So I quite enjoy it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I actually wasn't sure whether to bring those up, but I have seen the movies. The second one, I sort of noticed more that they reused jokes from Family Guy and maybe maybe it was just from Family Guy. I can't remember if there was also a joke from American Dad or Cleveland Show because it's Seth MacFarlane. But yeah, there's also a new prequel show for Ted. Have you seen any of that? I haven't seen it yet.
No, I've just seen the first two films. Really, that's pretty much about it. I didn't even know they were making a TV show.
Yeah, like I've heard positive things about the show, which is actually kind of surprising given the franchise is what it is,
Yeah, it just doesn't really feel like a TV show appropriate IP, I guess. I don't know. I mean, you could possibly work. Like we've seen Stranger Things before, like the success of the Mummy cartoon that was obviously a spin-off of the first two Brendan Fraser films. But yeah, no, I mean, I guess it could work, but I'm gonna hold my reservation for now, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'll check it out and yeah, we'll see. But yeah, so there is one thing in this film that I was kind of worried that they'd go this direction because it's so cliche, but they do the thing where like, the stepmom says we gotta get rid of this bear, and the little girl, Alice, she's like arguing with her, and it gets to a point where she's like, "You're not my mom," and it's it goes into the typical like step parent slash child argument thing where they're like, "Oh, you're not my real parent," and that goes on for a bit, and it's like I don't really feel that like that was necessarily needed in this, really.
Yeah, and I guess they kind of tried to break it up a little bit by having that bit where the little girl does hide the teddy bear in the cupboard or the wardrobe, is it? Yeah, the wardrobe, sorry, of her bedroom to sort of hide it away from her stepmom. And you sort of feel like the oncoming anxiety really ramping up from that point because now you're like, okay, there's some implication of there being something present that we're not illicit to at this point. So yeah, no, it definitely tries to play around with certain concepts and tropes like that, but it doesn't really dissuade away from the fact that, like you said, the first third or so of the film is kind of slow up until we get the hand on plank scene.
Yeah. What'd you think of the actor that they got to play the detective who's trying to find all the connections between all these strange happenings?
His acting was fine. I thought it was pretty functional, but which is kind of what I was going to expect for that kind of role. Although actually, I'd expect that kind of acting more so from the exposition dump, like old lady, really. But I don't know. Actually, no. You know what would have been better, actually, and to give his character a bit more gravitas, I think if they'd made him some sort of like, I know it's a bit of an overplayed trope in certain films, but if they made him a sort of like a green recruit who's just sort of been promoted to his position and is very inexperienced, and he's obviously trying to help the family out as much as possible, but his green inexperience shows through, and sort of he makes some honest mistakes. But I think, yeah, if they played him off a bit more like that, it would have worked better. But as it was, I thought his acting was fine. I didn't really have many massive issues with it. I just didn't think it was super remarkable, to be honest.
Yeah, I was really surprised that they got Randall Park, of all people, to play this role, because I feel like some of his recent roles have been more comic relief, or he'll play like someone who's kind of a loser, like in that Blockbuster TV show that was ironically on Netflix. Yeah, I don't know. It's really weird seeing him in this type of role.
Yeah, it's sort of a similar sort of subconscious emotional culture shock to seeing like Bob Hoskins in the Super Mario Brothers movie in the mid-90s when
Yeah.
when up to that point he'd just spent like about 8 years starring in loads of gritty British gangster films.
Yeah, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yeah, okay, that's an outlier, but I mean, like, for the most part, for like 7 or 8 years up to that point, he was starring like quite serious films, and then he was in that, and it was like the silliest film of his career, and you're just like, why? But then you're sort of like, oh, it was made by Nintendo, you probably got paid a fat bag to be in it, so that's probably why. Same with John Leguizamo as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I believe it. I just find it kind of funny that basically the only things I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen Bob Hoskins in are Who Framed Roger Rabbit and that Super Mario Brothers live action.
There's a film that's really fascinating. It's like basically a commentary on British and American relations and like British relationships with Europe, and it's really interesting. It sort of like shows like a sort of a forecast of what would happen in the future, and it's sort of basically about a British English gangster trying to make a name for himself in the new world of gangsterhood, and he's kind of got to do that while dodging attacks from rival gangs plus the Irish mob, and also while trying to build a relationship with an American mafia. So it's a really good film. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it was from the late 80s, and I'll try and find it. You should watch it. It's very, very good.
Okay, yeah, I imagine if that film, like, I don't know if it's British or American, but I imagine, like, if it's British, it would be very serious and done pretty well. But if it were American, they would try to make it a goofy buddy cop type thing, you know? Like with the narrator being like, they're from different worlds, but now they gotta work together, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like sort of the American remake in the mid-2000s of Get Carter, just kind of missing the point completely of like the tone and meaning of the original. Because the meaning of the original is obviously quite sort of gritty and sort of dark, and it's about sort of like how anger and revenge can poison a man, and then sort of the remake with Sylvester Stallone of all people is just like got this really weird, cheesy sort of feel-good ending, but even then, like, his acting doesn't really suit the ending or the feel of the film at all. Whereas like Michael Caine's absolutely suits the feel of the original.
Gosh, it's really weird that we were at a point where people thought, okay, let's get this 80s action star to be in this comic book adaptation, you know, get Stallone as Judge Dredd, and like I'm sure like people like some of the goofiness of it, but it was an odd time in like,
oh god,
cinema.
I just remembered he's also in Spy Kids 3.
Oh yeah, as a toy maker. Yeah, that was wild. I remember seeing that in the theater and like reaching out at the 3D stuff.
That kept happening for about, I think about like 10 to 12 years, from like the late 90s onwards. There was just a string for about 10 to 12 years from that point of like you said, 80s and 90s action stars just starring in really weird, kiddie sort of like duty sort of action films that just had like U rating and written all over them.
No, yeah, like you'd have well, I don't know if he was considered an action star, but David Hasselhoff from Baywatch was in the SpongeBob movie of all places.
No.
It's like,
no.
I'm a kid. How am I supposed to know
his performance is masterful in that film. You do not disrespect the Hoff.
No, yeah, I it's a fun performance. It's just so unexpected is what I'm getting at. You know, because like I'm a kid and I'm like, am I supposed to know who this is? You know?
Yeah, and then he turns into a jet board.
Yeah, which I'm pretty sure is what he's like in real life.
Yeah, the guy was on Baywatch, obviously.
Plot of this film progresses, and we get like a little twist where, you know, one of the creatures turns out is not on their side, and it's like supposed to be this manifestation that represents Alice's biological mom who passed away a couple years prior, and it's like she imagined her mom and would like try to talk to her for advice, and so that has become this thing, and it's like fighting on the side of good for lack of better phrasing. So what'd you think of that particular twist?
Yeah, no, I will admit that even though the tones of the film up to that point were somewhat predictable, that did genuinely surprise me. I didn't see it coming. Like, you could have probably sort of see it coming on maybe second or third viewing fairly easily, but on the first view, it really does catch you quite off guard if you're going in blind.
Yeah, I only saw this twice. I saw the colored version and then I saw the black and white version because why not?
I'm trying to remember, didn't they do a black and white version of Fury Road? Might be misremembering that.
Oh, did they?
I could just be having a moment, to be honest. I might just be going senile at only 30 years old.
Okay, yeah, no, maybe it happened in our universe and maybe not that other one. So yeah.
yeah, that would explain why there was loads of Tom Hardy sponsored dairy products afterwards. It's just really weird.
But I feel like that's a trend with some films, like Godzilla -1 doing the Godzilla -1 minus color thing, which sounds silly, but the movie is like genuinely class. Like I was surprised how into it I was.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think there's a few old black and white films from like the 50s and 60s that are like that, like really dramatic ones. There's a couple of old Swedish films from around then that are definitely enhanced by the fact that they are in black and white because of the quite dark and medieval tone that they kind of entrap themselves with.
Yeah. So by this point in the film, the creatures have, they've devoured some people, but now we got the deceased mother, like the imaginary version of her, like helping out our heroes, so to speak. So what'd you think of the way that this movie ended?
It's sort of got that underlying permeating sense of unease that fills the rest of the film. Like even when the data is gone and the credits are rolling, you sort of do just feel like emotionally tired, and you sort of still feel a bit uneasy. Like I did feel a little bit uneasy from like the last 30 minutes for like a good like 3 or 4 hours afterwards. Just sort of felt like I genuinely had to go and like pour myself a beer and like take a shower and just decompress for a bit, because I was just like, oh god, man, I'm feeling too intense right now.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. I do like that it doesn't do like a sequel bait type thing like some other.
Oh my god, yeah,
do.
finally. Just like the fact that that's been going on since like the 90s with films like I Know What You Did Last Summer. It just like, oh, it was so refreshing to see a film not do that for once.
And I did kind of like how throughout the credits, like, along with the names, we get like illustrations of the creatures. Like we get the concept art of in different development stages. I thought that was really refreshing as well.
Yeah, no, I always really like that when films do that. It's one of my favorite tropes. I really like that artistic twist.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to bring up, or do you want to go to final thoughts and scores?
One other thing actually I wanted to mention is that they were eating they were eating cornbread in this film, and it looks like the driest stuff ever. Like, you being American, can you tell me what is cornbread actually like? Because to me, the way it looks in this film did not look great.
So I think it could look dry, or sometimes it looks kind of smooth. But when you bite into it, at least with cornbread I've had, it's like, oh wow, this is really sweet. I'm loving this. If it's good cornbread, at least.
But what's the like? Okay, so it's kind of like sweetbread to a certain degree, but what's the actual like texture like?
The texture, let's see. Well, I'm basing this off of a couple of different things. Like there's cornbread stuffing and there's cornbread pie. I've had each of those. The pie, it kind of feels actually, from what I remember, cornbread pie almost feels as easy to like put a spoon into as flan is. Like it's not as fragile as flan, but
Yeah.
it does feel kind of soft. And cornbread stuffing, like the texture feels, I guess, if you close your eyes, kind of similar to mashed potatoes, but with vegetables in it. Because cornbread stuffing, like the kind I've had, like gets stuff like celery and whatnot put into it.
Nice. But what
Yeah.
about but what about just like straight cornbread? Have you ever had that?
I may have had it, in which case, um, trying to remember what that would have been like. I feel like it might have felt like a muffin stub, maybe, like not the top part, but like the bottom part in terms
Hmm.
of texture.
That could be interesting. Yeah, no, those always actually sound pretty good. I do remember the last time I went to America in 2017. Yeah, it was 2017. Yeah, and I remember I had grits for the first time on an Amtrak train between Seattle and San Francisco.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I it wasn't particularly nice, but I feel that's partially because it was the cafeteria cart on an Amtrak train, so it probably wasn't going to be amazing anyway.
Oh, yeah. So sometimes when I'm on the train over here, like once in a while, I don't go on it very often, but when I do, I sometimes think maybe I should get a snack from the snack bar down there, and
Because
then I just don't because I'm just lazy.
no, because the thing is as well, like the vast majority of trains in the south of England, at least, don't really commonly have food carts in them. At least the ones that I've seen. But then you go to certain parts of the northeast, and Scotland, and some of them do. And it's a delight, and sort of like it's amazing when you can go on to like a Scottish train and get like a can of Tennent's with like a Tunnock's tea cake and like a packet of like vegetarian haggis flavored crisps or something mental like that. I do like having a food cart on a train. It's very, very indulgent, but I do quite like one.
Yeah, Harry Potter lied to people. They don't have food carts on all the trains.
Hell, I mean, I've been growing up in London for most of my life, and none of the trains there have blooming food carts.
Right. Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to eat something after this. Like I got turkey in the fridge, so
Nice.
I'll do something with that.
I don't know what I've got. I think I made some homemade chana sag, which is an Indian curry made out of like sort of shredded spinach, chickpeas, and coconut milk. I might have made it a while ago, but I have been keeping it in my freezer, so it should be fine. Actually, I'm gonna probably have that with some fenugreek flatbread.
Nice. So, what are your final thoughts on Imaginary, and what's your score out of 10 and unit of measurement for that score?
I think my final thoughts would be it does have an incredibly slow first half or so, and it does take its time with certain developments of certain story points, but I think that the last third at least does rescue it, and the permeating sense of unease throughout the film, along with the cinematography and music, does also really help as well. So I'll probably give it I think a 7.5 out of 10. I think there are definitely sort of parts of the story and the way it's written that I would improve to just improve some of the pacing and some of the feel of certain story concepts. But I think overall it's a good film, and I would recommend people go out of their way to see this. And I might go out of my way to see this again as well, actually, to be honest.
Nice. And what's your unit of measurement for that score?
I'd say 7.5 capybara shaped cornbreads out of 10.
Nice. Yeah, I think for me this is 7 out of 10 detective hats, because yeah, like there were some things like I really appreciate that it didn't lean into certain cliches, but I do sort of wonder if I'd still appreciate it as much without that context of having seen other films that aren't as good, if that makes sense. Like, this is definitely better than some other films that just feel too tethered to some of those like repetitive techniques. So I appreciate the subtleties in this, but there are definitely some films that I would lean more toward and like more likely watch again. But yeah, I feel like with the 2 times I've watched this, I feel like I've got my score pretty much nailed down. Like, it's definitely worth watching because it's something a little bit different and there's some good execution in certain places. But yeah, I feel comfortable with my 7 out of 10 score.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a film you watch like maybe 2 or 3 times and then sort of like sort of pay homage to it in your own works. But I do think it deserves the legacy that it's probably going to end up building because it is actually a good film.
Yeah. Let's just hope that there are no sequels that tarnish the legacy, you know?
Oh my god. Well, there was one I watched with Greg from the Sussex Sci-Fi and Horror Society a while back, and it was like a prequel to a film that had come out like 14 years earlier or something crazy like that. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like this short. Oh, I can't remember what it was called. Actually, you'll have to ask him about it.
Yeah, I could probably scroll through his Letterboxd. But then again, he watches a lot, so it might take me a while to scroll.
Yeah, you might need to set yourself up with a case of blue ribbon and a whole case of like bags of popcorn to sort of see through it. Really.
Yeah. Ted's Booze Hour is sponsored by Blue Ribbon. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. Well, but on that note, where can people find all like your channel and all the stuff you're involved with?
Well, people can find my Instagram at Gitbag the Great, or they can find me on YouTube either as Gitbag the Great, which is my gaming channel, or as Ted's Booze Cellar, which is my alcohol review channel. And that's pretty much where I am. I've got a third channel that I'm kind of just sort of got in limbo at the moment. I'm still undecided to do with, but that's where pretty much everyone can find me.
Nice. Yeah, and I've also been considering making a channel, but I feel like I've already got like multiple things going on, and it's like it's
Well,
that fine balance of not stretching yourself thin, you know?
Tell you what, maybe just start off with something very basic, like reviewing, like maybe doing basic food reviews. Actually, tell you what, maybe start off with doing something like reviewing different canned soups or something.
Canned soups.
Yeah. So, like, hey guys, it's Stephen here today. Today we're going to be reviewing Campbell's cream of chicken mushroom soup. This stuff kind of looks like liquefied polyfiller, and I'm kind of freaked out by it.
Yeah, that'd almost be worth doing just for the memes, you know?
Yeah, you might as well. Like, I mean, if you want to diversify your portfolio, but you want to make sure you have your energy for your other projects, like maybe do something like that. Just something that's a bit silly, but still basic and sort of generally easy to sort of ease yourself into.
Yeah, I'll have to mull things over, but yeah, that's an interesting idea there. But yeah, thanks again for joining me on this one. It was great to have like this conversation with you, Ted.
No worries, and thank you for having me, and thanks for inviting me on. And I've appreciated the time talking to you, hanging out with you, and also talking about a very, very decent film.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll include the plugs in the edit. And without further delay, have a good day.
All right, take care of yourselves.
All right, Tim. For those wondering, I suspected that the prequel film released decades after the original that Ted mentioned was Exorcist the Believer, and I messaged Greg, and it seems like that is the film he was referring to. I personally have not seen The Believer, but I did finally get around to watching the original The Exorcist recently, and it really wasn't for me. I was kind of bored by it and surprised that I wasn't all that impressed by it. But yeah, so as for my plugs, you can follow me at Steven Shinder pretty much everywhere. The socials, Steven Shinder Storytelling on Facebook. And yeah, I'll put these in the show notes. So Letterboxd, Goodreads, StevenShinder.com, and I got 2 novels out, Standalones and Stepping Stones. Lemons Will Make Rain and Trespassing Through the Visages are part of that series. And, fantasy, horror, comedy, a bit of sci-fi. And you can also write to this podcast via delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts on cornbread. Any good cornbread recipes? I don't know. You can also find me on me and my dad's podcast, Yesshift, where we talk about Yes and their members and people who've worked with them. We actually recently interviewed Steve Hackett, former Genesis guitarist who has a new album coming out called The Circus and the Night Whale. And next episode, I have an idea of which one I want to talk about, but first I want to confirm with someone, so I guess you guys will see. In the meantime, here's an update from me from the other universe, who has been watching some movies, old and new, recently, and has also watched the Ted prequel series, so he'll share his thoughts on those in a moment. Hi, this is Steven from that other universe, with an update on what's been going on here on the movie and I guess TV side of things, and again, no spoilers. So I guess over here, Coyote versus Acme is not being released after all. Like, Warner Brothers turned down some offers from other places, and now they're just gonna decide to delete it and make it a tax write-off, which it's so frustrating. But hey, at least the delayed replay universe has it, or a version of it anyway. But yeah, like, we're not getting that like true version to our universe type thing, or my universe, the other universe, you know what I mean. But anyway, I've actually gone to the movies a bit more often so far into this year than I expected. I thought that I would not really go to the movies until maybe March at the earliest, but I went ahead and saw Godzilla -1 minus color, which I guess my delayed replay version self also saw. And to answer the question that was mentioned in this episode, yes, there was a Mad Max black and white version in my universe as well. It was called Mad Max Fury Road Black and Chrome, although I did not go see it whenever it was out. I just wasn't really into the black and white craze, apart from maybe when, like, I watch black and white films and shows now and then, but it's because that's how they were broadcast, and I quite like how they look. But whenever things get released in black and white, I'm not always so keen on going to see them. Back in 2011, I believe it was, The Walking Dead Season 1 was broadcast in black and white. Or maybe it was a couple years later than that. I don't know, but I thought that was cool because the comics were in black and white, so it felt like an homage to that. But Godzilla -1, like I've said, it really impressed me so much that I really did not mind seeing it again. So I went ahead and saw it, and I feel like, it's pretty much the same movie, just without color, so it's still great. But something that popped out to me is that when Godzilla appears, in the first scene he appears in, the contrast does more favors for how he looks in the beginning than how he looked in color, where it was kind of dark when he first appeared and he didn't look that great, and it wasn't until he popped up again later that he really looked great. So I think the black and white really enhanced that particular portion of the film. And I know people were saying they kind of missed the colors of the beams that he would shoot out, But I think there's also something kind of cool about how the lighting for that looks without color. I think it was kind of similar to certain things in the Justice is Gray version of Zack Snyder's Justice League. So yeah, I was pretty pleased with the experience of seeing it in black and white. Although there were a couple obnoxious people in the theater who afterward I heard saying, man, it was something like the movie being too chatty for them, and one of them like fell asleep during, and they were like bothered about having to read the subtitles throughout the movie. But I feel like I'm like misspeaking now and then, but yeah, it's like, what movie did these guys think they were seeing? Like, I don't know. Maybe they thought it was going to be just normal blockbuster action movie, maybe with less substance than some of the others, just dumb action fun. But the movie is so much more than that, as I've talked about on the, like, at the end of the Godzilla X Kong episode of Delayed Replay. So yeah, I really enjoyed the experience of seeing minus color. And then as a contrast to that, the next day I went and saw The Wizard of Oz with my friends. It was an 80th anniversary screening, the childhood favorite, and you know, it's a classic. It starts off in black and white and then turns to color. Like, that was a huge thing back then, you know, the 1939 film. And there were some things I noticed. Like, I didn't quite realize how many exotic birds were in a certain scene. They were easier to pick out on the big screen than on the small screen. So, yeah, I was very happy with that screening as well. And then the day after that, I went with a friend to see Argylle, the new spy movie. It's about a spy fiction author who learns, like, if you see the trailer, she learns that, oh, these events in the books that I write actually happen. You know, it's like that. And Henry Cavill plays the spy within the book. I heard there's like an Argylle book that came out recently, which is supposed to be what the book that's shown in the beginning of this movie is. Like, it's a fourth book in that series in the movie, and they just made it in our universe, or my universe, whatever, as a promo tie-in. And I guess there was some discussion of like people wondering who wrote it, and because it says by Ellie Conway, who's the author character in the movie, and some people I guess were speculating that maybe Taylor Swift wrote it, which I don't know too much about that, why people think it might be her. I think there were some other guesses, but yeah, I don't really know a whole lot about that. But as for the film, well, again, no spoilers. There were so many fun surprises. It was a fun, very meta spy action movie, and directed by Matthew Vaughn, so you do get Kingsman vibes. Although I do think they could have dialed back on one thing. There is a mid-credit scene or something, or maybe it's at the beginning of the credits, but I feel like the movie would have been stronger without that. You know, kind of similar to how I felt about Saw X, but still a really great film. I had a lot of fun. Going in, I saw criticisms from people saying that the film feels too long, but I never felt like it was overstaying its welcome. I was really tuned into all the action, all the dialogue and interactions, and you got great actors. You got Bryce Dallas Howard as the author I mentioned, and you've got Sam Rockwell. Bryan Cranston even plays someone. You've got and Samuel L. Jackson has a little role as well. He's on the poster, so that's not a spoiler. But he was kind of different from how I'm used to seeing him. I'm used to seeing him play a very angry character, but here he felt a bit gentler. It was kind of like watching Christopher Lee's character in the Hugo movie. So I bet that was kind of refreshing for him. So yeah, I thought this movie was really fun. I give it a 9 out of 10 Argylles. I don't know why the critic score for this was low. I guess I could see how some might think it has surprise overload, but I feel like because it's tongue-in-cheek and playing off of some spy tropes, it can get away with that, at least in my opinion. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was a great first new movie of the year, well, in the theater anyway, because I did also see, like, before this I watched what was it called, Role Play. It's this movie on Prime where Kaylee Cuoco is married and they have kids with them, but she is secretly like an assassin, and it kept me on edge, like what's gonna happen next. And I guess it is a little bit predictable, but I had fun watching it. I thought it was like, I give that one 8 out of 10 bullets or whatever. So yeah, those are a couple like really fun action movies. And more recently I saw Lisa Frankenstein. Apparently this came out on lead actress Catherine Newton's birthday. So, you know, it's her starring opposite Cole Sprouse. And, you know, Cole Sprouse plays a dead person who's brought to life. And, you know, it's a dark comedy, a bit darker than I expected, actually. I kind of got Heather's vibes from this. And some people have said they get Edward Scissorhands vibes, so maybe it's a mix of that. There is a little bit of gothic vibes to it. I don't even know if that sentence made sense, but anyway. Yeah, it was fun. There were some gross out moments that I can see being divisive for some. Like, some will find those funny, some will cringe or feel uncomfortable. But overall, I had fun with the movie, and I give that one an 8 out of 10 graves. Like, the movie does get absurd, and I feel like there's some things that could feel very, you know, I'm not so sure about this, but I feel like because of how it's executed and how funny and it can be, like, I feel like there's like some stuff to enjoy here, and there are some uncomfortable things that happen, but there's also payoffs. And yeah, like, I can't say too much about it, but yeah, I really enjoyed going out to see this one. And it wasn't even, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go and see it, but then I was like, why not? Kind of last minute. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it takes place in 1989, and I've been kind of tired of stuff set in the 80s, but this sort of like reignited my like enjoyment of that type of thing, you know. But speaking of period pieces, I also watched the Ted TV series, which was also mentioned on this episode. This was on Peacock, only 7 episodes. I was kind of surprised because I thought there were 10, so when I finished the 7th, I was like, oh, that's it. But I've seen the 2 Ted movies. I actually barely remember anything from the first one. I remember the second one better, and my impression of the second one when I saw it with a couple friends was we noticed there were like, or me and one of the friends at least noticed that they recycled jokes from, at least one of them was from Family Guy. There were a couple from Seth MacFarlane's works. There were some kind of funny moments. I guess Comic-Con scene was kind of interesting to see, but there are also like jokes that felt like they were being too edgy and kind of gross. But the TV show, I feel like the TV show is better creatively in some ways, but it does still range tonally from, you know, heartwarming, wholesome moments to needlessly edgy And while I don't know that they needed to throw that joke in type humor, which I guess you could kind of say about Seth MacFarlane's animated shows. It's just that this is a live action sitcom, and I do think that format works better for Ted stories. But yeah, like I don't know, like I don't like there were some, like I said, wholesome moments that were worth watching, but maybe I've just outgrown some of these other jokes that were in there. And since it's set in the 90s, you know, the attitudes are different then than they are now. So it kind of feels like they are trying to be authentic to the era. But yeah, there's just, yeah, I don't know. I can't really, you know, I don't want to be here all day or whatever. But yeah, I do kind of wonder, you know, I saw that this might be like a mini series, but I kind of got the feeling because, you know, the Mark Wahlberg's character, his character is a teenager in this, played by a different actor, obviously. And I saw some people comment that they feel kind of sad that, like, the character, you know, watching this show, they know that he'll eventually become Mark Wahlberg's character and how he is in those movies. But I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the Ted franchise ended up taking the soft reboot route, where like this show could kind of feel like a prequel, but then it eventually goes its own way and decides, oh, well, actually it's a separate continuity, kind of like, you know, a bit of what we've kind of seen in X-Men and Transformers. But yeah, like I don't know if they'll go that route, but it's kind of a vibe I got. I don't know if it's just something that came to mind or if I really picked up on something, but yeah, that was my overall impression of the show. Overall, I give it a 7 out of 10. I don't know, teddy bears. The family dynamic was, I guess, kind of new. You know, the parents who are kind of hit and miss. The cousin was an interesting character. But yeah, so that's pretty much my update when it comes to movies and shows. And it's, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I've also been rewatching Babylon 5 via the Blu-ray set that I got not too long ago. Been watching one disc per day since the 30th anniversary of the first episode on the 26th. The Gathering pilot I watched when the Blu-ray arrived in December. But yeah, I've been watching one disc per day, and I'll be finished on Valentine's Day. And it's been such a fun ride rewatching that excellent sci-fi series. Really hope we get the reboot series over here. But yeah, so that's my update. And without further delay, have a good day.